Welcome to Can I Get a Retake, where we explore the accomplishments of our innovative community.
Each month, we speak with one of Great River Learning's higher ed instructors and authors.
Together, we discuss trends in education, areas of study, and a variety of teaching styles and philosophies.
My name is Michaela, your marketing coordinator.
My name is Michelle, your web design supervisor.
And this is Great River Learning's Can I Get a Retake? Today on Can I Get a Retake, we are speaking with Peter Cunningham. Peter is lead professor of economics at Mount Hood Community College in Oregon. Peter received his Bachelor of Arts in International Affairs from George Washington University and a Master's of Science from the London School of Economics. Peter has earned the National Association of Small Business International Trade Educators International Trade Educator of the Year Award in 2022.
He has over 30 years' experience in economics and international trade, directing state international trade operations, and advising multiple U.S. governors and mayors in international trade policy. Most importantly, but we're biased, Peter is the author of 4 GRL titles: Introduction to Economics, Principles of Macroeconomics, and Principles of Microeconomics in a Contemporary Context, the impact of China, Brexit, and the USMCA on the economy. His latest title with GRL is Trade Director Diaries, Real-Life Experiences Navigating International Trade.
Have you ever been asked, can I get a retake?
No, I haven't. I've never, usually I get my takes in the first time, so I don't have to do a retake. So no.
Then we'll just ask you to launch into your background and how you came to be where you are now as an educator.
Cool. Well, I started my studies at college at George Washington University. I always knew I wanted to do something internationally, but it wasn't until I took my first Intro to International Business course that I realized that this is trade and business economics. This is something that I really have a passion for and what I'd like to devote my career to. So for the first, I'd say 2/3 of my career, I worked in government, mostly state government, federal government, helping U.S. governors, come up with effective trade policy and economic policy to deal with the challenges of globalization. And I wrote a lot about that in my 4th book, The Trade Director Diary. So it was an interesting, pathway. I really love the content, the training at George Washington. I did my master's work at the London School of Economics, which really, it's a whole different approach to education and really helped me, via the Socratic Method, become much more inquisitive. And, I really love that form of teaching. And then I started teaching sort of part-time back in the mid 80s. Love that too. I've always had sort of this second career going. So when I decided to retire from the politics and, from government, it made sense for me to step into this full-time role as a tenured economics instructor for Mount Hood Community College. So that's a quick snapshot, of how I've gotten to where I am today.
Yeah, and we really wanted to talk to you a bit about what that trade director role looks like. So I guess, could you explain, what did you do as a trade director? What does that look like?
Yeah, it was I started out as the international trade specialist, kind of as a junior role. And that position was more working with companies, helping them identify markets for their products and services globally, helping to create jobs in the various states that I worked in. That was a really great sort of foundation. I got my first chance to work as a trade director for Wyoming Governor Mike Sullivan. I was working in Colorado as a trade specialist, and I had a chance to meet him, and he had just been elected and wanted to do more for job creation for Wyoming, and felt that this would be a great way to put some energy into trade development, helping small and medium-sized companies in Wyoming find markets globally. So that's how I got into that, helping to write marketing plans for the companies. I wrote the marketing plan for the state. It was a really interesting and exciting period of my career.
I have noticed that you have worked in different states across the country, totally different regions. Was there a lot of cultural difference even between the Southwest versus New England?
No question. Yeah, I'm originally from upstate New York, so I was pretty familiar, with that part of the country. But moving to the South was a big challenge for me. North Carolina. I had a really good friend who was the trade director for Mississippi. We actually wrote one of the books together, Liz Cleveland, and she made me do a test of, what it takes to be a Southerner. And of course I failed it, horribly, but she, I think what really helped shape me throughout my career was, I got to, I learned all the content and knowledge from the academic training and the practical experience out West as, a director and specialist. But, then I had this amazing boss in North Carolina, Secretary Jim Fain, who ran the Department of Commerce for North Carolina. He was very distinguished statesman and just very cool, calm. He helped me kind of take all my energy and enthusiasm for trade and, my approach to, life. And he sort of, be, more cool about it. Right. And just be, I had to adapt to the Southern culture. I couldn't go in gangbusters like I had in previous states, up in the Northeast or, out West. So it was a really good training for me. And I probably one of the highlights of my career is working in North Carolina. That was the height of globalization. We lost so many jobs due to companies relocating their textile plants, their furniture plants, all these different technology plants offshore to China, India, Vietnam. So we had to move quickly to figure out how to, adjust to that economy. And I've included in the book, the Trade Director Diary, some of the, what I learned in terms of that process.
I also saw that you were on a lot of different trade missions. When you went abroad, what were your goals? What was your goal to bring back to the governors and, your plans in the State Department?
Yeah, well, it's kind of again, we wrote this is included in the book. We have a whole section devoted to, doing what it takes to organize a trade missions 101. But my first trade mission I led in the first time in the mid 80s, 87, I was in Colorado. I had, an amazing regional manager at the Department of Commerce, Sam Serrato, who gave me the opportunity to organize and lead this trade mission to Italy, Sweden, and Holland, basically, so the Netherlands. And, it was a challenging job, recruiting companies, getting them to commit, so many resources, small companies, for senior executives to be away from their company for so long. That's a big job. So we scaled it down to like basically about a 2-week period. We came back with $6 million in projected sales, from the meetings that we had, a lot of work. Commerce has some amazing operations globally. They're commercial operations based out of the U.S. embassies and consulates. It's their job to help small and medium-sized companies find partners to generate jobs in various U.S. states. So they were great. It was a really wonderful experience. The recruitment aspect was brutal, getting 6+ companies to make it worthwhile, and then to plan everything. I had to go over to an advance mission to make sure all the I's were dotted and T's were crossed, meet my partners in the various locations. But we had a big success, and I was, again, a big highlight, and it gave me a taste for trade missions and really gave me an edge as I went on into my career to work for various governors. I had that experience under my belt. I knew how to plan a governor's trade mission without too much trouble to various countries globally.
Yeah.
I'm curious for your expertise when it comes to global trends, policies, markets. What should the average layperson be aware of or be following?
Well, one of my favorite chapters that I wrote in both the micro book and the Trade Director Diary book is the, sort of International Trade 101, where we go from back to Ricardo, when he was, the original developer of comparative advantage theory in the 1700s. We start with that, and then we come to modern day. How do we deal with the challenges of globalization today? And so basically, there are a lot of. I try to frame the learning in a way that so students walk away understanding the history, but they understand how it applies today. Right? It's not. We don't just want to know a bunch of theory from the 1700s. We want to know. Okay, why should I care about international trade today? Why should the Smoot-Hawley Act, in the 1930s be relevant today? What did we learn in the 30s during the Great Depression when we raised the highest levels of protectionism ever in the history of global economics, right? And what happened? I mean, it was the worst economic downturn we've ever experienced. So there are lessons to be learned, from history in trade, and I try to frame it in a way. I actually have a few surveys that I do, interactions with the students, where after they've been exposed to the history, I ask them, well, you've learned all the different approaches to international trade. Are you a free trader? Are you a fair trader? Are you a protectionist? Right. And so it's interesting to, get the feedback from the students and have that discussion. I just want to have them aware of that, when they leave these courses and when they leave these, finish these actual chapters in the various books. So it's a really, for me, it's very satisfying to have had all these experiences and be able to translate them into basic understanding for the average person. So they know when they're hearing a politician talk about, oh, protectionism is good for our country, they have a background to say, well, is that really our history? Is that, maybe for some people it works, but others, we need to look at the big picture and what do we learn from history?
Yeah. Well, and going back to Michelle's question about cultural within the United States, when you traveled internationally, I'm sure that there were a lot of cultural differences and changes. I mean, what was that like to have to, meet people from a lot of different countries?
Yeah, that's
And
what
convince them to do business with you too.
right, right. That's what really attracted me to the field of international trade and international business, because there's so many variables, nothing is ever the same, right? But you have to learn about the different cultures if you're going to be successful in doing business there. And in chapter 2 in the Trade Director Diaries, I talk about doing business in Japan, right? In Japan, like many Asian cultures, you don't just arrive, meet your potential business partner and sign a contract and fly back home. It's not like that. You have to, build relationships. You have to build trust. You have to go out and you have to sing karaoke and you have to have dinners. And, it's a lengthy process. It's a huge commitment to, you have to do your research. Is this market really big enough to justify all this time and investment, of money as well as your time, to develop this market? But, of course, Japan's one of the top 5 markets globally. So it's really important. I had the same experience in Mexico, right? Right after NAFTA was signed in the 90s. I took so many trade missions to Mexico City, to Monterrey and Nuevo Leon, and to Guadalajara. There's so many Western U.S. companies that had no connection to Mexico because it had been perceived as an economy with limited potential for sales, right? So we had to start from the ground up. But again, it's tiempo latino. You don't just go to Mexico and start doing business. You have to, build relationships. It's not quite as extreme as Japan, but it's still, there has to be trust. There has to be willingness to work together and to get to know each other first before we open the doors for business.
Yeah.
So you have 4 titles with GRL, I believe, correct?
Yeah.
4 titles.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
What was your key motivation to create your own digital materials?
Well, I was approached by one of your former colleagues, Mary Hem, and she reached out to me at a time when I was kind of frustrated, with other materials that were out there. There were good materials out there, but what I found with the traditional publishers model was, you write something and then it's, 4 years later, you do another edition, and 2 years later, another edition. And, you're always behind what's happening, in in your field, right? For example, during that time, Brexit was a hot issue in the UK. And, was Britain going to, leave the EU? Was it going to leave the, what were the impacts of all that? It's a very hot issue. There were no publications discussing this because it was so up to the minute. So I thought, when Mary approached me, I thought this would be great. Here's my chance to take all my stories and put them in one place. Here's a chance for me to frame the discussions, frame the education. So from my perspective, looking backwards, if I had known about, the different schools of thought, as from chapter 1, in economics, that would really help me understand, as I learned the different theories. Oh, am I Keynesian? Do I believe in government intervention? Am I a classical economist who just feels that, let the market decide, we shouldn't be involved? Am I a, neoclassical, economist during the Reagan administration, the Reaganomics, which is a reinvention of classical economics for the 1980s. So all these different things, the training was really, it was very, I wanted to frame all this for the students to make it easier for them. And so I thought, with Mary giving me this opportunity, I thought this is a great idea for me to organize the way I want and bring some current videos into the publication and also to be able to change it as often as I need to, which I love. I don't have to wait for 2 years until the next publication deadline or edition to make it work. So students get up to the minute trends, which is important. Inflation is the hot issue right now, right? So we talk about, why did Chairman Powell wait so long, the chairman of our Federal Reserve, to begin reducing interest rates? Normally you don't you start intervening once interest rates, inflation gets above 2%, right? And he waited till it was like 8, 9%. So it's, that's a really good discussion we're having right now in the classes.
Do you have any tips or like things that you help your students with in class to prepare them for like a trade director life?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of my job as a tenured economics instructor at Mount Hood Community College. Part of my job is advising, right? So I have to advise the students. So yeah, a lot of them come to me. I just had one student who decided to major in economics as a result of these courses. And he's just won. I actually created a scholarship at the college. All of my royalties for the books that I sell to the college go directly into a scholarship fund for students for econ majors. So I'm trying to encourage the next generation to, really focus on this area and really build core competencies and contribute to the field. So it's kind of interesting to help students along that journey, to give them advice about what schools to go forward to, what bachelor's programs have the best programs for international trade and international business or economics in general. So that's a very satisfying part of the job for me as well.
Yeah.
When it comes to some of the methods you learned at LSE, for example, that Socratic method, are you able to apply that method to your own courses?
Oh, very much so. It's a little harder in the asynchronous courses, where we're not really interacting, via Zoom or in person. But now, things are opening up again. I'll be back teaching some in-person classes this winter and this next spring back on campus. So, I typically, I'll bring the publication up on the screen and we'll talk about the learning objectives. We'll talk about the material, we'll watch the videos, and, then we'll have some discussions, right? And that's part of the Socratic. I learned more from that when I was in grad school than studying PowerPoints and reading the book and highlighting the book and, the old fashioned way of, absorbing a lot of information.
Right.
What I love about this format is it's very modern and allows the students to use all this, material that are at their fingertips to learn and to move forward in their careers.
Right.
You kind of started talking about my next question, which is, what kinds of things did you not like about other books that you made sure that you included in your books?
Yeah, I think the key thing for me was the ability to edit it, and to add new material, right? And Brexit's been one example where we've gone back and as it's evolved, added new material, especially to the trade director diaries and to the micro text. But it's a lot of work, right? It took a lot of time. My first book that I did was the micro book, and my advice to any instructor considering this would be to choose a chapter that you're really passionate about. Right? It's easier to write about things you really love and are, and I chose, of course, no surprise, I chose the international trade chapter. I had like 12 learning objectives and went on and on for pages and pages. And because I had a lot to say and a lot of experience, a lot of interest, I was excited to, have my best practices, all my experiences put somewhere finally, where it can be of use and not just in my head. Right. So
yeah,
it's the flexibility is great, the ability to structure the book which you think makes the most sense based on your experience. I mean, all my chapters started with, let's talk about the history first. Let's, talk about the schools of thought. I wish I'd had that, when I was a freshman in college, so.
Yeah.
That's going to fall into my next question, which is kind of if we have aspiring authors maybe listening, what were the pros and cons of that development process for you?
Yeah, well, for me, it was worth giving it a try. You have to be super disciplined, right? When you have a participation agreement in place, you map out, I'm going to finish chapter 1 this week and chapter 2 this week, or maybe I'm going to go to chapter 7 first and then finish chapter, whatever. It just, you have to have for me, I'm at my most creative part in the morning. I can sit down and close everything off and just focus on the writing. I'd spend about 1 or 2 hours a day each weekend, just, cranking out the various chapters on the various topics. So you have to be disciplined, but the cool thing is your editors really are super in terms of helping us map out a plan, and, we can adapt it as we go forward, but it is, there's a lot of support there. I was amazed by you have editors to help with the actual writing and production of the content, but then you have also creative graphic people that can help choose the right images, and all that. It's a beautiful sort of partnership where we all work together. So once you've done one, it was easy for me to do the other three. I had a pretty good sense of what the workload was going to be, and I tried to do this like during the summer when I wasn't quite so busy teaching. Yeah. That makes a big difference as well.
Do you feel like your teaching style has changed now that you have your own publications that you're using, or do you feel like they're just an aid to what you are already doing?
I'd say it's more the latter. I mean, I've always been sort of a Socratic Method instructor. Some of my students get freaked out by that because they're used to, in high school having their professors spoon feed them everything. Here's a PowerPoint. Let me go through. You don't have to do anything. Just come to class and breathe, right?
Right.
In my class, expected to do all that, before you get to class. And then we have really good discussions about what's happening, in the current environment. And there's one exercise we do in macro where I actually have them, after we've had all the training about fiscal versus monetary policy, how do you manage a macroeconomic economy? I have them, I assign them a country, right? And I make them the economic czar. And okay, you're in charge of the US, of fiscal and monetary policy. First of all, who's in charge of fiscal policy for the US, and who's in charge of monetary policy? And I created this video of a 747 showing what it takes to manage an economy, and we actually produced it together with GRL, and the students love that because it's if the plane's going too fast, you crash the economy. If the plane's going too slow, you crash the economy. And you have 4 engines, 2 on each side of the wings to kind of guide the economy. So they love that kind of analogy. So I have them jump in, and they make advice to the political leadership of these various countries what should be done, or maybe congratulations for doing what you're doing, right? But they walk out of the class with a really clear understanding of how economics works. It's hard to get people excited about economics. It's typically been viewed as the dismal science. If you ever saw the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, there's one scene where it's the economics professor, teaching the students that are in the, that are in the sort of the timeout, and they're all, falling asleep, and he's teaching monetary and fiscal policy. So I figure if I can make it more interesting, I'm going to take that as a win.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because I took micro and macro when I was in college. I don't remember any of it.
Right.
And I remember all of my classes except that. And I wish I remembered more of it now as an adult, because obviously it's a lot more applicable once you are in the workforce and you're paying more attention to world policy and all of that. And so now I'm like, wow. My brother, though, he was an econ major, so I just have to text him and ask him.
That's great. Or just reach out to me. I'm happy to help with any questions.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. For me, it was the same. I really had to stick with it because I've had some professors that, my first, international trade course we'd spent an entire semester on the theory of comparative advantage. I mean, it's an important theory, but it's not really relevant to, today. We're talking about the 1700s of, UK versus America. And, we never saw his face. He was up at the board doing, X, Y, X axis, Y axis, supply, demand, and equilibrium. It's like, it made your head kind of hurt after a while. But, I stuck with it. And I realized that, it's important to understand this foundation. Michael Porter at Harvard kind of took that and modernized it, right? And made it more, in the 1980s and 90s. He made it, he wrote this book called The Competitive Advantage of Nations. And I quote a lot of this in my books. And it's just, we talk about what does it take to be a successful country economically in today's, 21st century. And it's, it's about, focusing on industry clusters and, putting energy in areas where there's technology being applied. We want the higher quality jobs being created using technology, as the major input. So he was way ahead of the curve in that in the late 80s and 90s. And it's still that his cluster, theories are really, it makes it more relevant to today's economies.
Yeah. Speaking of technology, this is a new question that we're really asking, and that is, what do you see the effect of generative AI like ChatGPT and its role, one, in your classroom, and two, its effects on the global economy?
Yeah, it's a little scary. One of my cousins is a tenured professor at University of British Columbia in the sciences, and a lot of his students are writing papers, right? And so the AI is generating all the papers. It's really creating quite a trauma in that particular field.
Right.
In my field, it's, the students are graded based on competency in understanding the various, learning objectives. They're taking quizzes, they're taking, final exams. So there's not a lot of writing, other than the writing is that we have discussion questions in our forum on Blackboard every week. They have to respond to each other and respond to my questions. I haven't really seen AI too much, and I'm sure it's creeping in. I'm sure it's there as a threat, but it's there. We have to deal with it, right? It's not going away. So for me, it hasn't really affected us so much in economics, but I'm sure in writing classes, science classes where you're writing a lot of essays, it's a whole, you have to. I'm sure there's going to be some new technology developed to identify it and deal with it, right? That's what's been the trends in the past, right?
Yeah.
We had special, software to help identify this and to put a stop to it, right? Because all the students are doing really is cheating themselves, right? You're there to learn, right? You want to learn these skills so you can take them with you forward into your life.
Absolutely.
Oh, great. And I'm interested in how this broad and accessible AI is going to affect a broad range of industries too.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting.
Across the world.
It's the fourth wave. In economics, we call this the fourth wave, the emergence of AI. And I talk about that in the books, right? It's just you have to be aware it's there, right? And we have to be aware of it. And, the technology is going to have a huge impact, over the next 100 years plus.
Yeah.
But
we'll have to take you up on your offer of contacting you with questions.
Oh yeah, please. Anytime. I love it. I love to talk, as you can see, right? I'm in the right field.
I had a couple more things I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
Your trade missions and traveling. I was wondering, did you travel with an interpreter for a lot of these missions, or did you learn a lot of new languages?
Yeah, languages are not my skill. Ironically, being an international business, I learned that early on. I barely made it through French, right? And I tried Chinese, I just gave up. It was just too much, right? But the key thing is you learn in this field the key priority of having partners, right? And so anytime we bring a governor to China or to another country where English was not the main language, we'd hire interpreters, right? And there were Class A interpreters, right? If it was a really serious big meeting, with a high level political or business official. But most people at that level, have studied English at university, right? So it was rarely an issue. But informal meetings, you had to have interpreters, right? And you hired the best to make sure there's no miscommunication.
Right, that would be so stressful. Just worrying about whether or not you're communicating your true intention.
Yes.
That's high stakes.
there ever a case where knowledge of or ignorance of the local norms either cost or helped a mission that you were on?
Well, Secretary Jim Fame from North Carolina was just amazing. He just worked so hard, right? We do the briefing packets, and he'd be working up to the minute to add whatever was in the current newspaper articles that morning into his speeches to show he was in tune with what's happening, in that community. We had 9/11 had just happened, right? And we were all kind of freaked out. We were planning a major trade mission to Japan. It was actually a regional mission. We had there's an organization called SUS, Southeast U.S. Japan organization, and it was started post World War II to strengthen relationships between southern states and Japan in the area of foreign direct investment and trade development. So, and every year they would, one of the southern states would host it, and then it would go back to another region of Japan and vice versa. So it's a big, long-term deal. I'm sure it's still going on. So we had a decision to make. It was about a week or two after 9/11. Should we cancel the mission, right? And all the other states that were on this mission with us, or 7 other states, they all canceled. And I advised the secretary. I said, look, this is probably the safest time ever to travel. In the history of aviation travel, is going to be super, super safe. I think it's our role as government leaders to establish confidence and stability back into the markets. So I think it really makes sense for us. I think we'll make, a bigger impact if we go ahead. It may not be perfect. We may, we shouldn't require people to come with us if they don't want to come. We lost about 2/3 of our mission, right. But a day or two before we left, quite a few people decided to come along at the last minute, and they were really glad they did. But when we arrived in Japan, normally we would meet with like the senior vice president of corporations, or we'd meet with these various, mid-level managers. We met with the president of every corporation because we were the only ones there, right? And there was such outpouring of sadness and concern and, empathy for what happened, and it was, he was amazing. He was on like the Today Show of Japan. It was just an amazing experience. And we had that hard discussion, and I'm so glad we came to that conclusion. I gave him the strong advice that we should go forward. Other people were saying, no, it's too scary. No, we shouldn't do it. No, let's push it a year. And I'll never forget that, because it was a really incredible mission. We actually went from Tokyo to Nagoya, where it's a center of the automotive industry for Toyota. And, we've had long-term relationships with Toyota. We've had a lot of Japanese investment into North Carolina at that period. No big plants. Like, there's no big, Mercedes never came, Toyota never came, Nissan never came. North Carolina was unwilling to give the excessive incentives to make that work, right? So we would get like the smaller suppliers. But anyway, we met with Aisin AW, which was they made transmissions for Toyotas, right? And we went out karaokeing, and oh my God, it was, we were also stressed out and exhausted, but, we made a really strong connection with them during that particular mission, and they decided to invest in North Carolina as a result of that. Virginia was on the table. They stayed home, they missed the opportunity. We were able to translate that, courage and that leadership into actual jobs that were being created, in North Carolina as a result. That's my positive story. My negative story, oh boy, I won't tell you the state. I had one senior political official from the US, I'll leave it at that, who was quite colorful. And we had the ambassador from Japan arriving, and I was trying really hard to, again, strengthen relationships, cultural relationships, educational relationships. All these things are important. If we're going to attract Japanese investment to this particular state, we had to, you couldn't just flip a switch. There had to be cultural commitments, there had to be educational commitments, a big deal. So we had the ambassador coming, which is a really big deal. And the political figure, agreed to meet with me and to meet with the ambassador. We arrived at the point where we're all going to meet up, and this person arrived with an entourage of people that I didn't know. I'm like, time out. Can we talk over there for just a minute? What's going on? We're meeting the ambassador in like 20 minutes, and we've been through this. It's a very formal process, even though he's he understands Americans and understands America. We still have to be respectful to the cultural processes of Japan. And you'll be in the room by yourself talking to him, and hear your talking points, and I'm sure his staff has prepared talking points, and this is how it's going to go, right? He's, well, no, these people are my friends, and they want to be with me in this meeting. I'm like, well, but this is right after the Kobe earthquake had happened, right? So he made one comment. Well, some of my friends want to donate to the Kobe fund to help rebuild Kobe in Japan. I'm like, oh, okay, I think I can sell this. So pick up the phone and call the ambassador, said, look, with a slight change of plans, we have a small group of people here that friends of our senior political leader who wish to donate to the Kobe fund. Would you like me to accept the checks down here, and you can meet the ambassador, you can meet this individual? Oh, no, Peter, fine, bring them all up. Come on up to the suite, and we'll have a chat. Well, so up they come. I'm being very clear in the elevator. Please, keep our conversation to a minimum. This is a very formal meeting. It's a very important. We're trying to make headway with this ambassador. It could lead to significant investment in our state and tourism and trade. It's all please. You're deputized as ambassadors. So in we go. They present, the checks, and they insist on photographs, of course, which the ambassador was very gracious. And then, we're supposed to go into the private room, and the political leader wants this entourage with him in the room, right? So I'm there trying to, run interference. And so we sit down, and the first thing out of the political leader's mouth is, I really wish you had more time to spend, in our particular city. I have this amazing collection of Japanese internment camp furniture on my property, and I'd really like to show you this property. This collection is quite unique globally, And I'm like, Oh my God, what
Oh,
I'm
pull out
sure.
of that.
I know it was really hard. So everyone knew, even the entourage knew that was the wrong thing to say, right? But it was like, luckily this ambassador was pretty savvy. He spent quite a bit of time in the U.S. I'm sure we're a case study in the Japanese Foreign Service, training about what not to do, in a high-level political meeting. But my heart sank about 18,000 feet, and I just stepped in at that point and took charge of the meeting, and we focused on the talking points of the importance of trade, tourism, and linkages between this particular state and Japan. So we got through it, but boy, I'll never forget that experience. And I think the students have told me they like reading these stories.
Yeah.
It adds a little more. It's not just boring trade theory. We have some practical. That's what we call them the diaries. And it's interesting things that happened to us during that period of time, which I'm glad we have a place for those stories now, which is the Trade Director Diaries.
That is so stressful. I can't imagine. It's almost like a movie or like, it's a great book. It'd be a great book just, even if it was fiction, but it's real.
Yeah, it was not funny at the time. I couldn't believe it was happening.
Oh God, no. It's one of those things where you can look back and laugh at, but in the moment you wanted to die.
I did everything right. I did all the talking points, keep it simple, focus. It was too much. It was too funny. And that's just one example. There are a lot of funny examples. And my other colleagues, Liz Cleveland from the state of Mississippi had even more outrageous experiences. And Mary Regal had some experiences too from the state of Wisconsin. So the three of us together, we covered the South, the Midwest, and the West. It was, and of course I traveled other states as well, but it makes for a really interesting read.
Goes back to the importance of learning history, of learning cultural norms and differences, not only this profession, but across the board. Yeah.
It's true. It's true. To be successful in many fields, you have to have a broad background in all these areas, right? Especially in international business. And that's what attracted me to it. You had to know history, you had to know culture, you had to know marketing, you had to know law. There are all these things that it was never ever dull, never the same thing twice. So that's how I got all this gray hair.
Were there any international ambassadors that embarrassed themselves, or was it only, Americans that embarrassed themselves?
Well, in my experience, any high-level political figures I met with, were amazingly polished, amazingly, effective in their roles. I can't think of not one that comes to mind. But that was a challenge for us. We are in these, smaller states, with not a lot of international sophistication, trying to help these governors be, project the right image, project the, focus on what was important so we could generate jobs. That was all about job creation in our respective states. So some of us were more successful than others, but it was it was a learning curve, because previous to that, like back in the 50s and 60s, states didn't care about international. It's all done at the federal level. It was it became like in the 80s and 90s, they realized that there was all this opportunity for growth and development. But we can't leave it to the feds. We have to, each state's got to promote their own best economic interests. So it was an interesting time to be involved in all that.
Yeah. Well, and I love talking about things like this because they're jobs that exist that you didn't know. Like I never knew that was actually a job until I was researching you to prepare for the podcast and looking at your publications. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's a real thing that anyone could do, if you go to school for the right thing. So
exactly.
That's what I like about talking with you and our other authors that we've done on the podcast so far. Like, just about professions and careers that you wouldn't know existed.
Yeah, right. It was great. I kind of stumbled onto it. I always knew I wanted something international. I have members of my family that were teachers globally, so they'd come back, and when I was very young, I'd be exposed to their experience living in Nigeria or living in northern Canada, or the Caribbean. They had all these funny accents, funny clothes, and I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting for a small town boy from New York State. And but it wasn't until I went to college that I realized there are careers out there where you could do this full time, and I loved it.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed our conversation today. I feel like we could have multiple
continue?
podcasts, like continue on.
Uh-huh.
We definitely like to have you on again sometime.
Would love to. It was so much fun. Thank you both for your great questions and, for the opportunity to promote the books. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I'm happy to chat with you anytime. It's always a pleasure.
Can we ask you one more question?
Of course, yeah.
So we do this little spiel called "You're Wrong" at the end. It's kind of your opportunity to rant about some kind of miscommunication or misunderstanding that people have about the industries you've been in or economics in general. So is there anything that kind of gets your goat? Well, here's a chance to tell the world.
Well, the big thing for me is protectionism, right? I just, during the Trump administration, he was pursuing aggressive protectionist policies. And for any student of economics, international trade, we've learned, I mentioned it earlier in the podcast about the Smoot-Hawley, laws that were passed post, at the beginning of the Great Depression in the early 30s. And it sent the world into an economic downward spiral. So I was just shocked, at how so many citizens had no recollection of this. You say Smoot-Hawley, they don't know what you're talking about, right? It's a more of an academic thing for historians and for economists. But what I hate to see, what makes me crazy is, if we're going to repeat the same mistakes we've made back in the 1930s, we learned from that was the worst thing to do. The way you help economies recover is you focus on where we have comparative advantage, right? And technology, entrepreneurs, and we have to support entrepreneurs. We have to use technology as a tool to help industries evolve. And we don't want to, what we've seen historically is if you protect an industry, they don't do anything. They just sit back and keep doing what they're doing and reaping in the profits. Protectionism doesn't work, right? We all are better off when there's competition. I mean, not unbridled competition. There's a balance. That's why I view myself as a Keynesian economist. That there's a role for regulation. We needed regulation post 2008. When we had the housing crisis, we had let those regulations go too loose. We had to bring that back, right? We had to have some regulation, but not too much regulation. So it's those are my beefs, right? And I just hate to see history repeat itself when we've learned these lessons the hard way, during the 20th century.
Yeah, that was good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank
Okay,
you so
cool.
much. It's great to meet you both. I really enjoyed this.
Me too. Thank you.
We'd like to thank Peter again for the lively discussion and for sharing his unique experience with our audience. Our conversation really stands on its own, so I'll leave with my final thought. Peter's emphasis on practical knowledge is invaluable, and it is the retelling of these lived experiences that will ignite the next generation of economists and trade experts in a way that theory alone cannot match.
All of Peter's publications integrate practical knowledge and experiences, but Trade Director Diaries really delves into those tales of interfacing with local governments and sister cities throughout the world. Hands-on real-life examples are what capture students' imagination and show them what is possible for them in terms of future careers. I think anyone who teaches economics and wants to showcase this avenue their students can take should pick up this title. Can I Get a Retake is hosted by Michelle Manneman and Michaela Albee. The show is edited by Maggie Christensen. Artwork for the podcast was designed by Michelle Manneman. Our intro and outro music was created by Coma Media.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe, share, rate, and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts. To join the conversation, you can find us on Instagram at Can I Get a Retake. For show notes and episode transcripts, visit greatriverlearning.com/podcast.